Welcome to Clips, a series of shorts where we cover facts or factoids from our larger episodes. Or in this case, in some of the other cases actually, we cover something I missed. Now, we've already done a very old episode on the Colt New Army, but in preparing that episode, I missed out on something a little critical, and I'd like to talk about it now. And by the way, if you're thinking that I'm talking about revolvers a fair bit lately, that's because I am. I've been learning about them more and more, which is why I was able to stumble onto the solution to an old problem on this particular gun. Now, this Colt New Army was absolutely out of time when I got my hands on it, and it's no surprise, look how rough she is. But these guns are notorious for going out of time. And when we recorded the video, we were under the impression that the number one reason for that is because of the fact that it rotates against the crane, and when the crane builds up slop, it therefore walks out of time no matter what you do with the mechanism. However, I'm starting to believe I may have to redo that episode because I've noticed something. This gun is very unique in that it has a set of cylinder stops here all around the gun. And on most Colts, we're used to those cylinder stops being the final word in aligning the chamber to the barrel. However, we can also see that in addition to the cylinder stops, it has these scalloped cylinder stops. So square, well, little rectangles, but divots, and then scalloped. Now, whenever you see these scallops on a revolver, that's a sign that the hand is going to be turning the cylinder is going to bump up against this hard ridge here, and then this ridge and the hand are going to work together to pinch the cylinder into the correct alignment for the bore. Those are very delicate alignments. They tend to walk out fairly easily-ish compared to other things, but they're also exceedingly common in European revolvers. Most of the revolvers that we have seen through the show, that we have in the collection at the moment, on loan or whatever, they use the same kind of system. So it's not bad. It's just not what we expect in the US. As a matter of fact, we're so used to these little guys in the US that we tend to check our revolver timing by cocking back and then wiggling the cylinder. But in this case, you can see cock back and wiggling, I got a lot of play. These little stops are not doing anything for us. So when we pull that trigger and let the hammer down, if we hold it for a second, now we've got tension between the hand and one of these stops, the one that's currently up under the gun. And in that case, we have a lot less wiggle, but there would still actually on this gun be a fair bit. Now, I had already checked the hand. It seemed like it was in good shape. I already checked the stops. They seemed like they were aligned where they should be. But what was happening is I was getting just a little bit of back travel. Like it wasn't quite completing its rotation. It wasn't snugging in reliably to the same position every time. And if I put a little shim on the hand, it felt like I was overdriving it. So that made me very curious as to what else might be going on in this gun. And having played with the Colt 1878 now, I realized that this little lever, the one that allows us to open the cylinder, that lever is actually playing another role in the gun. It's not just retaining the cylinder in there. Watch what happens as we index the gun. Back, and click. There we go. Back, and click. And there's a little jerking when I pull that trigger because it's getting the final bit of hand movement through there. It's not perfectly timed. Now, in the US, we love these guys so much that we think that we have to have lock before we pull this trigger. But again, being that this has some sort of, hand involvement on the stops, this gun, it's perfectly fine that the hand is providing the lockup as it releases that hammer. That's normal for a lot of revolvers. What isn't normal is that it still had a fair bit of slop into it until I really took a look at this guy. It's a bit tight in there, and you can tell someone's done some home filing or smithing at some point, but we can see what I need to see. And I'm going to skip the patented plastic and get in there with just a little punch so I get tight enough for you to see. This lip, slope, vertical cliff, slope, vertical cliff. Can rotate this way, can't rotate back. And the reason for that is because with the hand driving over center this way, the cylinder wants to rotate this way, and our little latch isn't just keeping the cylinder in the gun, it's also preventing the cylinder from rotating backwards. This is actually a hand-me-down from the Colt 1878 because it also used its sideways opening gate for gate loading in order to, it had a little tooth on it that prevented counter rotation. So in other words, when we go to fire this system and we pull the trigger all the way through, boom, at that moment, our hand has gone past at one point. The lower one's holding on to the lower tooth of the cylinder. It's being held up against the cylinder stop, which is down here. Hard to do and look at the monitor at the same time. And then when we go to let go, this means that we now have an empty here. We may have an empty over on this side, and we may have full ammo here. So live round, empty. Maybe there's an empty here. Maybe there's an empty here. The weight is on this side and it wants to drop back. So at this moment of release, when the hand is no longer providing the pressure to go this way, this prevents that counter rotation. But at the same time, I've noticed that this can be an indicator of being out of time on one of these guns because it tends to click down right at the moment the gun enters proper lock. So if you have one of these Colt New Armies or New Navies and you go to full extension on the hand, you're pulling the trigger all the way down, and this has not pushed all the way forward, then you can pretty much guarantee that you're out of time. So go through, scrub everything out, make sure that the spring pressure on this is still good. I actually had to replace the spring on this one. And then in doing so, this guy tends to pull the cylinder into a pretty good lock position. If it's still not quite doing that, then you need to stretch this hand or somehow modify this hand to work better, which in the end is what I had to do. I had to give it just a little push, and then this guy dropped right in where she belongs. And that is just yet another way that this really fairly finicky system can get out of time. I mean, the number of parts involved in this operation is really fairly high compared to the guns right after this generation. Now, knowing how the gate was supposed to work allowed me to take a gun that had otherwise been DQ'd and out of time for many years and put it back into, well, let's see. Ooh, not a click in sight, reliable functioning order, perfectly aligned and ready to shoot again. All right, well, if you've enjoyed this, why don't you take a look at some of our back catalog, including an episode on the New Army overall, albeit without that little distinct detail, but the rest of it's pretty good if I say so. And if not, you can check out anything else that we've produced. Otherwise, have a good one.